Thank you everyone for attending our third installment of the Business Recovery and Sustainability webinar series through the St. Louis Regional Chamber. My name is Tabitha Saris, and I am the Vice President of Investor Relations at the Chamber. My co-moderator and the person behind the magic of this webinar is Bethany Monahan, our Director of Business Engagement at the Chamber. A few housekeeping items for everyone. Everyone's automatically muted. So if you have a question throughout the webinar, please submit it via chat, and Bethany will read those at the end for our panelists to answer. You will receive a copy of this presentation after the webinar is complete. So let's get started and introduce our amazing panelists. Rebecca Rausch, she is one of FleishmanHillard's leading issues management communications counselors. She's a hands-on strategist who regularly works with C-suite and executives and their teams to help them anticipate, prepare, handle crisis, high-profile litigation, contentious public issues amongst the global landscape. Currently, Rebecca is co-leads FleishmanHillard's COVID-19 task force. In this role, she leads strategy development and manages the COVID-related matters around the clock. She is one of FleishmanHillard's certified crisis communications counselors, which helps develop issues and crisis preparedness. She oversees every aspect of issue management, communications, including strategy and plan development. Whoops, hold on one moment. Now I'm having bandwidth issues. And as a former television reporter, Rebecca is an experienced media trainer. She has helped clients prepare for and execute interviews with 60 Minutes, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and NBC Nightly News. Before joining FleishmanHillard, she served as... Can everybody hear? There's a little bit of background noise. Okay, sorry. Before joining Fleshman, Rebecca served for the Illinois Deputy Director, for the Illinois Governor as Deputy Director of Communications, and she received her Bachelor's of Journalism from Mizzou. Our next speaker is Miss. Are we having some issues?
It's showing on my screen. I'm sorry. Susan Conrad is up next if you want to get moving on that one.
Okay, Susan Conrad, she believes consistent performance and ongoing value creation begins with the people-centric leadership, particularly in today's knowledge economy. She has successfully applied this approach throughout her career in professional services, finance, and real estate. Corporate and nonprofit leaders alike turn to Susan to navigate change, improve performance, and develop future leaders. As a partner of Chapman and Company's Leadership Institute, Susan helps organizations understand the intersection between people, culture, and a thriving business model. She draws upon 30 years of experience envisioning strategy, acquisition, corporate finance, and operations to help leaders create a culture where both people and businesses are successful. Susan earned her degree, her BSBA Finance from the University of Missouri-Columbia, another Mizzou grad, her MBA from the Washington University's Olin School of Business, and SPHR designation from the HR Certification Institute. A native St. Louisan, Susan is a proud mom to her 3 unique and inspiring children, Caitlin, John, and Megan. We also have Josh Kell, an award-winning creative focus on results-driven ideas. Josh uses his experience and passion to lead the strategy, creative development, and activation of multi-platform campaigns at Switch for several of the world's biggest brands. Switch is an agency that creates meaningful experiences that entertain, engage, and educate, creating a lasting impression and ongoing relationship between consumers and brands. And finally, last but not least, we have Brian Hall, who is a recognized expert in the field of travel and tourism, marketing, and advertising with over 30 years of experience in hotels, destinations, and airlines. A frequent guest lecturer at the Cornell University of Hotel Administration, WashU, and SLU, Brian regularly speaks on marketing issues in the travel and tourism industry. He is a member of the America's Board of Directors of the Hospitality Sales and Marketing Association International. He holds a BS degree in Economics and Marketing from the Whitmore School of Business and Economics at the University of New Hampshire, and an MBA and doctorate in management degrees from Webster University. In his role as CMO of Explore St. Louis, he oversees the destination's tourism brand positioning and marketing activities. He has received numerous awards for his efforts. Prior to joining Explore St. Louis, Brian was the president of the Campbell Group, a Baltimore-based agency specializing in travel and tourism, which merged with GKV Communications, where he then served as president and COO. His account responsibilities included clients such as the Intercontinental Hotels and Resorts, Crown Plaza Hotels, Staybridge Suites, and the Puerto Rico Tourism Company and Visit Baltimore. Whew. So, thank you. Ben, thank you to our amazing panelists. You see, we have a very experienced and dynamic group of panelists. So let's jump in. I want to open up the first question to all of our panelists with, how do we as a business community work together to help get through this current situation? I'm going to start with Josh, and then we'll go to Brian, Susan, and then Rebecca.
Yeah, I mean, I know part of it is, you know, definitely cliche, but it's the kind of the mantra everyone's taken, right? Better together and doing it together. And so, you know, we're going to certainly talk about why, you know, people matter, the people within your organization, but also the people that you serve, whether it's your customers, your clients. You know, what can you guys do together to really make it work? I think that I've got a Bill Withers album behind me, RIP, but the idea of Lean On Me and his song there, you know, I think is something we can definitely learn from, is how can we all lean on each other? And so empathy is going to be a big part of that, kind of understanding what each person is going through. You know, I think that one thing we've definitely seen with employees from leadership standpoint, we talk about the idea of being human, is they really want to know you have a plan. They're pretty forgiving. You know, they don't expect you to be perfect, but they want to know that you are trying to move forward, that you're trying to figure it out. So, you know, how can you make sure that you're communicating about job security, or their career advancement? What kind of support are you giving them as far as who they can reach out to internally or even externally? You know, what are your new policies? How are they changing? And really just trying to keep them up to date on the future. You know, but being, you know, the first to admit that you may not know everything yet. This is, you know, we joked about the word unprecedented being used about 1,000 times at this point, but, you know, this is something we haven't really gone through before. Even in 2001, 2008, this is very different. So, you know, working together to figure it out as organizations and as a community is going to be really important.
Great answer, Brian. Yeah,
sure. I'm gonna color this with a little bit of a story to give you some perspective in reference to how we view things at Explore St. Louis. So I'm coming to you from the American Center Convention Complex, which is very dark and very empty. We have over 2 million square feet that are presently being unused right now. There are about 10 of us roaming the entire complex. So we're giving new meaning to social distancing. That said, very early on in this crisis, we were very concerned for the people of the hospitality industry, with the understanding that perhaps this crisis, in fact, I think it's more than perhaps, this crisis is impacting hospitality professionals, perhaps more so than any other constituent group in this community. So at the inception of the orders that were coming down from St. Louis City and St. Louis County that began with prohibiting groups of over 1,000 and then down to 500, 250, 10, and then stay at home, we had reached out to a number of members of the hospitality community who were very much concerned about their livelihoods. Individual hospitality businesses are in fact the backbone of our community. Shops, restaurants, all of those places that we enjoy frequenting as St. Louisans and we brag on routinely, were very much endangered, and they continue to be endangered as far as their ability to survive. So we worked with a number of members of the hospitality community, including Gerard Kraft. Gerard and I had a conversation about a month ago, and we saw that there was an existential threat to these small business owners and many of their employees, and we mobilized to put a plan in place to help benefit them. We established the Gateway Resilience Fund that to date has given out some $650,000 in increments of $500 per recipient. So what we've attempted to do is we're steering clear of economic cliches in reference to, you know, we've lost this amount of event revenue, we've lost this amount of hotel occupancy, and we're keeping it focused on people. We're trying to show how we can mobilize as a community to help those people that are presently in need, who are unemployed and need some compensation. But then also how you can support some of these small businesses right now by ordering takeout, for example. I challenge everyone who's tuning in right now, order takeout today. Go to STL Take It Home on our website and support those local businesses, because it is indeed all about people.
Great answer. Susan, do you have anything you'd like to add on how we can, as a business community, work together?
So, you know, it's interesting, as a business community, basically what we are is just a collection of people trying to do things together. As Brian and Josh have talked about, our interdependence with each other has never been probably brought more to the forefront than this crisis. The ability for us to think about the people that we rely on every day, and we haven't maybe thought about that in the past. We think maybe our traditional customers or our vendor partners, but realizing that just everyday life is impacted now. The teachers, the medical professionals, whatnot. And so just this idea of, as our focus has been around, how do we help the leaders who are trying to make sense of this? How are we helping people who are in positions of influence? And so a lot of our focus has been to support them by saying, hey, let's start by recognizing that this business are made up of people. I don't walk to an organization, it's an empty building. What connects us is the fact that we're people who like to work with each other, who are bound by a common pursuit. That may be something really noble to serve, to keep people healthy. It might also be, how am I distributing food? How am I taking care? How am I innovating? Right now, we've got a whole bunch of engineering companies out there trying to figure out how can I solve for some of these challenges we need with medical equipment. And so we start with, let's recognize that it's a people issue right now. So start our conversations with, how are you doing? Because everybody's experiencing this a little bit differently. We recognize that what may be going on at home is adding additional stress. People who are work from home are actually not able to work from home and having to go into the front lines of some of this. So our whole approach, and what we'd encourage people to do, is say, start with just asking people, how are you doing? Let's figure out what's going on in your world so that we can do a better job of listening and then addressing your needs. Like Brian talked about, hey, recognizing what the hospitality industry is hit with, it comes from understanding what people on the front lines are doing. So checking in with them first as a person, and then recognizing they're experiencing things differently. We have a team in South Africa who's under stay-at-home orders as well, but their stay-at-home looks a lot different than ours. On the streets, they've got police officers and they've got rubber bullets being sent around to keep people in their homes. We're fortunate that we don't have that. So you just need to start with, can I recognize your humanness? Can I listen to understand what's going on in your world? And can I connect with you as a human first? And then we'll begin to build some of these responses. So again, it's as leaders, we're kind of often taught to jump in and solve problems. And so our first caution would be, stop and listen first to make sure you know what kind of help is needed, and you can direct your efforts, because being efficient with it right now is really critical to getting people the help they need. So
yeah, and one thing I do want to add as far as being human, and going a little bit deeper in that is, you know, I like to say, don't be a robot. You know, a lot of times when people are internally, both are communicating internally or externally, they're almost, you know, feels like they're reading from prepared statements. And everyone right now is going through a lot of different emotions. Like you said, everyone's experiencing it differently. So, you know, recognizing that, and, you know, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. If you're talking to internal employees, you know, how can you just be more human in that communication? You know, recognizing what they're going through, you're going through it too, and it's okay to show that. And I think externally, we talked about the restaurant business. You know, you see a lot of them who are going to social media and saying, we are a small business, we are struggling, we are scared, we're trying to work through it, and let's get through it together. You know, they're showing that human side, they're being vulnerable, and people are really connecting to that. So I think it's important to continue that type of communication.
and I just encourage you, start with your team first. the way you're handling your team is the way they're going to handle the people that they're responsible for serving. So your clients and your customers. And so make sure you're checking in with your team to see how they're doing. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through the morning, but make sure that you're checking on them as humans first and then get to business. Today is not about selling stuff. Today is about how do we understand where we are and what we need to go forward together.
I would add, just before we leave this topic, your internal communications and how you treat people will become a very dominant theme in your external reputation. So we know we will all be judged years from now by how we treated people today. So just recognize that there's a very blurry line and no distinction between what you're saying internally to your people and what you're saying externally.
Agreed. One of the biggest questions that we hear is, am I going to lose my job? Susan, I'm going to ask you, what is one of the things that you think we can best support our people during this time when they ask us the question of if they're going to lose their job?
I'd offer the best thing you can do is to be transparent, as transparent as you can. So if you know that you're going to need to consider some of those things, you need to let folks know. If that's not on the table, let them know that as well. And if you don't know, then the best thing you can say is, we don't know right now. We're looking at all of our options. And so we're going to do our best to take care of the people on our team. And we're going to look at all the resources that we have, and we'll get back to you. We'll promise. What you can commit to is staying in communication with folks, but don't try to make promises that you can't keep. At the same time, try to be honest with the reality of it's uncertain. We don't know how long it's going to last. And we're looking at all of our options. So the transparency and I think the authenticity that Josh talked about, being realistic with people and using real language is probably the best gift you can give them.
And then one last question, kind of to piggyback off of that, is from an internal perspective for our C-suite executive leadership that is tuned in on this call, how do you manage the cost while minimizing the impact on the staff? And Brian, I'm going to ask you to answer this one.
Sure. One of the things that we have, the actions that we've taken is that short of laying people off, we have placed a lot of individuals on furlough. In doing so, we've maintained their benefits. We've done so for anticipated period of 30 days, hoping that we'll be able to put much of this behind us, but we need to face reality. We may need to extend it as well. Other individuals, including all the staff, myself included, that are still presently engaged, are reduced to work weeks of 30 hours. So we're taking furloughs at least a day of each week. In addition, we're being invited to take some of our vacation time now in anticipation of when we recover. We don't want people loaded up with a lot of vacation time. So take it now. Now's a really good time to take some vacation time, stay at home, so that when we can turn the corner and we can re-engage, that people are going to be able to dedicate themselves fully to, in fact, doing so. Federal legislation has come out that is enabling companies, it's actually paying companies to keep people on the payroll, even if they can't work. And so I think that many people are now looking at that legislation, looking at that particular program as a solution to keep people on their payrolls, even if their business activity has been substantially curtailed. But there are a lot of solutions short of outright laying people off, because our hope, our desire is that this recovery is going to be very much a V-shaped recovery. All indications are, based on what took place in China, based on what's happened after other similar incidents, ranging from SARS to MERS to 9/11, that we will come back quickly. So keeping employees engaged, at least if they're even on furlough for a period of time, so that they can spring back into action when the organization is ready to return, I think is really, it's prudent.
Makes sense. Makes sense. All right, well, let's talk about trust. And because trust is the cornerstone of communication. Rebecca, how do you determine who knows what information internally?
Yeah. So first of all, there's likely nothing more important in times of crisis than trust. Trust between you and your employees and your colleagues and your coworkers, trust between you and your customers, you and the citizens and residents you may serve, and you with all your other stakeholder groups. They have to be able to trust you. And when we break down what trust really means, it means being accurate. It means being honest. It means admitting what you don't know, but at the same time, reinforcing your most important priorities and what's driving your decision making. So what that really tactically means is people need to hear from you. This whole situation can feel very overwhelming any minute, any hour of any day. And sometimes you just don't know what to say. So that's when you really have to dig deep and put yourself in the shoes of the stakeholders that matter to you most and ask yourself, what do they really need to hear from you? Who do they need to see? Who's your messenger? Has your CEO or your leader been visible throughout this? These are all really critical decisions. And as the minutes and hours and days go by and people feel more and more physically disconnected, that only underscores the importance of accurate and purposeful communication as often as possible. Consistent over time, reinforce what really matters to you, and really be true to your values and make sure that your values are really driving those decisions.
Susan, question for you. What are some ways that companies can be consistent during this time to maintain that level of trust?
Well, a lot of it can be using tools like we're using here today on video, on video chat. You know, thinking about how we're communicating both information and acknowledging the feelings that are going on, the anxiety levels. That's ultimately what we're trying to do, is find solutions, reduce stress for folks, find a way forward together. And so one of the ways that you can do that, building trust, is to create some more connections, whether that is reaching out individually to folks. Hey, let me see how you're doing. Let me check in as a team. How are we connecting regularly to let people know what are the updates, what things we're working on, what challenges we're having? How are we reaching out to our clients, trying to connect with them and say, you know, what can we do to help now? What are we doing to maybe connect you to people in the other areas of the business world that could use your help, or you might be able to collaborate together. So looking for some of those ways to add value in non-traditional approaches of, this is the service we typically provide, and here's the product that maybe that we were talking about now. It's about, how do I help you satisfy your needs? And so we look at this statement here about making decisions and communicating from your values, like Rebecca said, is one of the best ways that you can create that trust, being consistent. If you're an organization that says, you know, we work with a group, one of their values is literally find a way. And they have, they're not doing a lot of activity. They've had to furlough some of their folks, but they've also repurposed some of their manufacturing equipment to help make some protective equipment for the medical field. And so it's interesting because it's hard to be able to balance, I have to lay some people off or furlough some folks. At the same time, how can we actually find a way to serve and help? So if that's part of our values, it can help us describe different ways to engage folks, to create more collaboration, to find ways to serve in the meantime. So that idea of trust, being consistent and serving from that North Star, it's not just values on the wall, but it's ways that you are actually living it out and highlighting that to other people is a great way to build trust and communicate with each other.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Transparency is also key to a thriving company and trust in this time. Josh, what happens if somebody communicates something that they shouldn't, or they take an action that proves to be a mistake? How do you handle that at Switch?
Yeah, I mean, it gets back to kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier as far as the human side. I think it's just being open and honest. You know, lots of people are dealing with something like this for the first time. They're trying to navigate it as best they can. They're trying to make the decisions that are, you know, best for the company, best for the employees inside of the company, the best decisions they can to keep that, you know, company moving forward and making money and hopefully setting it up for success long term. So people are going to trip. Sometimes people are going to outright fall. I think being able to admit that quickly, you know, admit that you made that mistake quickly, share what that mistake was, and even I think most importantly, share what you're learning from it, is a big part of that idea of being transparent. You know, I think that can be balanced a little bit. You know, it's easy to say be transparent. You know, people also have to worry about HR. They have to also worry about, you know, when you say communicating the wrong thing, something that can truly come back to haunt you and kind of hurt the business. So, you know, I think really thinking through what you are saying ahead of time, you know, being a little bit prepared of what you're going to say ahead of time. Again, not about reading a statement, but just kind of knowing, you know, at least what the basic landmines may be, you know, something else to consider with the transparency. It's the, you know, what can I say? And honestly, what can't I say is a big part of that as well. And I think that comes from just knowing your audience. You know, if you've established a culture internally over time of being very, very transparent, very open and honest, well, you know, you can still live that culture. You can still demonstrate that culture internally. You know, we talk about reinforcing the culture. You know, this is a time where, you know, whatever you've said you have been in the past, whatever you say you are, whatever the culture is you've tried to establish, now it's going to be the proof on whether or not that's actually the case, if that is actually authentic. So again, transparency or lack of transparency may be a part of that culture. So I think leaning into that is the way to go at this point.
Great answer. Great answer. Let's talk about culture for a little bit and establishing a rhythm with your company. So Brian, earlier today, you had talked about the business community coming together. What are some really good examples that maybe Explore St. Louis has done to stay relevant during this time? Like what if you talked about furloughing employees, but what's something specifically that you have done, or can you give us a specific example?
Yeah, right from the beginning, when the crisis first became apparent, we, under Kitty's leadership, established a series of webinars with our partners that we've been conducting each week. We initially broke them into 4 compartments where we had restaurants, we had hotels, we had attractions, and then service providers. So we're doing 4 calls a week for about the first 3 weeks. We've now consolidated those calls into a hotel call and then an all other category, if you will. It's been enormously heartening to see the response from our partners that is resulting from the engagement. Their enthusiasm, their creativity, their engagement in helping us work through together and solve this problem to maintain our relevance to our travel and tourism community has been just enormously rewarding. For example, we had a call about 3 weeks ago with our attraction partners, and they started talking about all the ways that they're creating virtual programming. The folks over at the aquarium have a regularly scheduled series of activities where you can actually have breakfast with the otter family. You can see sharks being fed. You can see all this educational curriculum. Then the zoo jumped in and they started doing the same thing. And we said, gee, yeah, we've got all this virtual content. Let's bind it all together and present it as virtual St. Louis. We've had people now tell us that it is the social studies curriculum for their children. Every morning, they do a dose of virtual St. Louis, which is both entertaining as well as educational. So we found that that communicating and having a sense of rhythm and purpose is enormously important. And one of the outcomes from virtual St. Louis was a brand new e-communication initiative called Daily Explorer. So each day of the week, we share 2 virtual ideas that are on the website. And the feedback that we've been getting from our partners is hope, optimism, and appreciation that everyone is doing their best during this really trying and difficult period of time to stay connected and be relevant. So I think a rhythm and finding ways that you can maintain the relevance of your organization. It's going to be different for everybody, but I think it's of vital importance.
Bethany, if I know you're moving the slides and taking care of that, which is great. And I just wanted to jump in here real quick before you move to the other one. Maybe for a framework of businesses that they're smaller groups, or it's a team that they're trying to stay connected. It may be a department within an organization. So trying to bring this in and make it actionable for anybody who's maybe on this call listening. One of the frameworks you might want to think about is, as you're looking for that rhythm, maybe think about asking these 3 questions. What do I want people to do, to think, and to feel in this time? What do I really need them to act on? What do I want to make sure that I need them to think about? Maybe there's work to be done. We need to rethink the way we're doing work. And how do I want them to feel? Maybe I'm trying to reduce some anxiety and uncertainty. Maybe there's a way that we need to find some creativity and collaborate. But if you use that think, do, and feel in that rhythm and that communication, it might help you fine tune what's the right answer for my team right now. And then kind of keep iterating on that. You'll understand, what topics need to be addressed, and then also maybe being mindful of where's your team right now and how do I get them to the place that we need to go together.
I think that's a really good standard and an approach to apply externally as well. If you're thinking about how you may communicate with your customers, I think we all feel a little email fatigue because we're relying on written communication and emails to even a much larger extent than previous to the pandemic. We're all getting emails from just about every business we've ever engaged with ever in our life. So really think about how to be purposeful in your communications. Make sure you have something specific to say and you have a really specific purpose for reaching out to your customers or your stakeholders on that given day. You want to make sure that you're not wasting people's time while they're feeling overwhelmed and inundated and frankly just really insecure in their own situation. So just make sure you define that purpose for your communication both internally and externally.
It's a really good point. I think COVID communications have become cliche and substantially unnecessary for many organizations that are just trying to weigh in and they really have nothing to add.
So that's a perfect segue into our next topic of selecting the format. So Rebecca, I was going to start this question with you, but I'd like everybody to weigh on what are the top 3 things to consider when training your employees for crisis communication. Susan said, how do you want people to think, do, and feel? Not in that format. I think it was do, think, feel. I'll get it right one day, Susan. But when you're training people to deal with the unknown, what do they need to consider? How do you make it easy for them?
Well, if crises were easy, we'd all be doing them every day. But I think the first thing to always remember in crisis management is to try to retain a sense of calm. Your job as a leader and your job as a communicator is to really instill a sense of leadership, calmness, and help people deal with their own anxieties and fears about the circumstances that are surrounding them. There's very little control in a situation like this. You don't control the pandemic. You don't control testing being available. You don't control a lot of things associated with this pandemic. So focus on where you can be helpful. And so you really have to think through your communications from every vantage point. Understanding who you're communicating to, what they need to hear, how you're communicating with them. Is a video more appropriate than an email? Is a conference call more appropriate than an email? What about a webinar? Do you need to see each other's faces? And then really consider the appropriate messenger. Your CEO, your executive director, your leader should be visible during these times of crisis, but they're not the only messenger within your organization. Some messages are better delivered by immediate team leaders. Some messages are better delivered by human resources leads or CFOs or COOs. So really make sure you're matching up the message to the messenger and to the audience. And really think through everybody that needs to hear from you. Try not to leave anyone out. Again, it only breeds additional anxiety and fear and instability and during a time where we really can ill afford any more than that.
Does Josh, Brian, or Susan, did you have anything to add on how to make it easier for your employees?
Yeah, I think, you know, it kind of along that lines, you know, there's everyone needs to be aware that everything is shareable these days. So an internal communication is very easily shared out to the world. So if you know, craft the perfect email or what you think is the perfect email, because you want to get your words down on paper and you send it out, if it's taken the wrong way, if it communicates the wrong thing, you know, employees potentially can share that with others, and they may not share it out, you know, on the internet. They may email it to friends in the industry and say, can you believe how we are being treated? So I think just being really, really aware that anything you say has a really good chance of getting out there. And, you know, we deal, you know, certainly as a marketer, and I deal a lot with external communications. I'm helping brands and how do they communicate with their consumers and with their customers externally. You know, there's earned media, there's paid media, there's owned media, and social media is considered a owned media because you get to control the message. But keep in mind, you really don't. Your customers get to control that message. You know, you may put some stuff out there that you think is relevant, but they're the ones who get to react to it. They can share it. They can share it with their friends, and they can do that in a very positive way, but also a very negative way. So, you know, when we talk about being authentic, know what you stand for and make sure that that message is being delivered and that you're confident in that message. That, you know, think about it as worst case scenario, everyone's going to share this and they're not going to like it. If you're at least comfortable with that's okay if they don't like it, this is who we are and this is what we believe, then you should put that message out there. But I think for anyone to think that whatever they say is going to be taken for face value, you know, is a little bit naive. So just know that anything is going to be shared at any time. I think it's going to sound a little weird, but if anyone has gone to the Steakum Twitter handle and seeing how they're communicating, they're not talking about their frozen meat right now. They're not talking about how you can make great meals at home and at this time of staying home, make sure you make dinner for the family. They're really talking about what is going on in the world right now. I think they're recognizing what people are going through, and they realize this is not, as a brand, time for selling. This is a time for connecting with people, and if they can do that, the selling will come, you know, down the line. You know, so recognizing that social media, for example, can be a format to share some of those values with the external world, I think is really important as well.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we've done concerning one of our stakeholder groups, we have roughly 400 volunteers throughout the community. Many of them are seniors. And we very much wanted to check in on them and make sure that they're all doing well. We didn't want to depend on email correspondence. So when you think about inclusivity and making it easy for people, we've actually been deploying some staff to calling every one of our volunteers. They are enormously appreciative for the outreach. We're offering that if they need us to pick up groceries or take care of any errands, that we'll find folks that can do that for them. So I think that you need to think about all of your organization's stakeholders when it comes to both knowing and identifying your audience and thinking about the appropriate medium. And we thought it inappropriate to communicate with that audience via traditional, you know, e-communications, and instead actually get on the phone and have some dialogue with them.
The medium is such a critical piece, especially when you're trying to convey emotion. So emails are one thing, as Josh put out, but just even, I love that we could hear your dog barking, Josh, right? So the humanness of what's going on right now, the ability to connect through video, for us to see each other in different ways, I think is going to create some great opportunities and deepen some relationships. But also we need to be mindful that our nonverbals are just as important today as they are when we're sitting with each other in meetings. And so we're all on these video calls. I think someday there's going to be a sitcom that shows all the strange things people do in video calls. But even simple things like making eye contact, right? Not constantly looking over here, like what's going on my phone. So if you're in a conversation with somebody and you're trying to convey that this is something, a person that you care for, or you've got critical information to share, make sure you're mindful of what you're doing, again, in that connection, in the video. And if you can, do a video call. If you can't, maybe something that you can record, pick up the phone. And yes, to Rebecca's point, I get hundreds of emails every day to a webinar, that we should attend. And so how can we be very intentional and know what's the right medium for the audience that I'm trying to reach? And if it's a relationship that you value, then invest the time in connecting in a different way beyond that email, because you would have done it pre-COVID as well.
And the only thing I'll add there is if anyone wants a dog, let me know, because I haven't failed.
I have a couple kids I can give you.
Not a fair trade.
Okay, so just a friendly reminder, if anybody in the audience has any questions, please put it in the chat so that we can circle back to those at the end of this. But I want to ask Brian specifically, and Josh actually, the two of you, how are you leveraging your networks right now? How are you leaning on your networks to expand your message? You come from two very different industries that are similar. So what are you doing? And I'll let Brian go first, and then we'll kick it to you, Josh.
Sure. Well, we talk a lot in our community about our struggle with respect to regional division. It's really heartening to know that 3 times every week for about the past 4 weeks, economic development leaders representing virtually every economic development agency in the entire bi-state region have been brought together by Otis Williams at SLDC for a half-an-hour check-in where we impart information and we talk about strategies, we talk about recovery, we talk about loan programs and a host of other topics. It has brought together the entire bi-state region and all 15 counties like I've never seen us come together before, which I think is a great prescription for the future, and I hope we can keep it up. One of the other networks that we're relying on right now are those that are in the meeting and convention industry. And in particular, we just had some conversations with our colleagues over at Merritt's Global Events, in addition to Meeting Professionals International in the St. Louis chapter. And I'm very pleased to share that Global Meeting Industry Day 2020 is going to take place on Tuesday, the 14th of April, over lunch, and everyone's going to order takeout, and we're going to benefit the Gateway Resilience Fund as we talk about the state of the industry, the momentum that we hope to experience in the future, and plans for recovery. Our networks that total hundreds of partners throughout the community, those groups that I just mentioned have just been an enormous source of energy for us and inspiration to help us make it through this. And I think relying on those networks during this time period is just enormously important for every organization. And obviously, your networks are going to be different, but identify them and come up with strategies where you can engage them and impart information and reassure each other that this is going to end. We are going to recover. It's going to be a new normal, but this too shall pass.
And just the two things I'll add to that quickly so we can get through to Q&A here in a little bit is, big companies have board of directors. Small companies don't necessarily have board of directors. So, talking to people in your network, people who own similar businesses and creating connections with them, friends you have, trusted colleagues you have that are not necessarily in the same business that you're in, leaning on them to see how they're getting through it and seeing if you guys can help solve some of each other's problems and batting around ideas together. So creating almost your kind of mini board of directors with the people that you do know. And then secondly, your customers are also part of that network. So when you get back to being open and honest and transparent, how can you reach out to them and say, hey, what do you guys need right now in this time of need? What can we do to help service you? What can we do to help provide for you? and then trying to make those adjustments. So seeking feedback from the people that you're trying to serve on a daily basis.
Excellent points. Excellent points. Okay, let's get to recovery. Great segue. You guys are teeing this up perfectly. And Susan, I'm going to ask you, as we look to the future, what do you see could be some of the new normals coming out of this that people should consider? For example, home delivery or Instacart or Shipt is really popular now, or Zoom. What do you foresee is a new form of communicate, or not new, another avenue of communication?
So, our business has been changed dramatically. We're in the space of trying to work with people and culture, and so a lot of that has been in-person delivery. And so we can see a lot more play on digital delivery, a lot more acceptance of connecting in new, shorter form ways. People are busy, but also we're getting used to this new pattern of connecting virtually. And so I think that influence businesses quite a bit. We also see that as far as new forms of communication, people really taking advantage of a lot of the technology that maybe was viewed as a nuisance or maybe not necessary. And so really seeing the power of what we could do with a lot of the new tools that people have, whether that's video, whether that's conferencing, whether that's digital. And so really, I think for our standpoint, we're looking at where do we see business is going to transition to. There's still a lot of in-person connection that people want to have. I don't think it's going to eliminate all the real estate. I mean, people are going to want to go back to offices and they need to be together to do some of their work. But we're going to see a lot of shift in this, this idea of how can I be more flexible in my work environment. People looking for that, that opportunity to say, can I bring back some of this connection that we have both between our work life and our home life, and can I bridge that a little bit differently on the other side of this crisis? So I do think it'll be kind of a new normal, and we'll take hopefully some of the good things that came from here, the learning, the connection, the deepening of the relationships, and figure out how do we apply those into our new ways of doing business going forward. So our hope is that there's actually more connectivity instead of less, even though we've been challenged with the social distancing. How do we close that distance in different ways?
Okay. And then Josh, question for you. As we look to return into the normal for some companies of engaging with and selling and supporting our customers and our clients, how do you think, or what do you think would be the number one way that we could do that right now?
Yeah, I think for us it's, and I talked about Steakum a little bit, is, maybe right now is not the time to do a hardcore sell. Building those relationships that'll lead to, that recovery down the line. On the slide you see decisions today impact your future. So relationship building right now is a decision you can do today that can actually help down the line. How you treat your employees today is going to help with retention down the line, with recruitment down the line. So, those are the things I would look at as just the relationship side of everything that you do, both internally and externally.
Great answer. Well, I know we have 10 minutes left and we have a few questions in the chat. I'm going to let Bethany take the role on delegating the chat questions out, because there's a couple of them. Bethany, do you want to?
So Lori Becker, she has a couple questions for you, and it's a twofold question. So the first part of the question is, how has your organization, or advised your clients to, address the digital divide in your communication strategy? She noted that a large segment of the population lacks internet access to information and resources. So how do you reach those people?
That's a really good question. One of the things that we have started looking at with clients is out of home as an example. Something that has been a little bit lost, certainly from a marketing standpoint, because people have started going to digital certainly well before this. But as people start to get back outside, as they start to kind of take to the streets again and get out of their houses, is out of home way to start reaching reaching them in a little bit more unexpected way. And I think for people who maybe don't have that internet access, what are the ways that you can kind of reach them within their community. I think also just looking at mobile. So, people may not necessarily have internet access to be on a computer, to be on a Zoom call. But I think, a greater number of people certainly have mobile devices, phones. So what can you do that's a little bit more friendly and easily accessible via the phone would be the other, advice that I would give to companies.
Lori also asked, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add the other piece is what are those opportunities for us? I know they sound a little old-fashioned, but to reach out and whether, like you said, Josh, use the mobile side, but also there's the mailing side. There's the whole what are the packages and the communications that we can customize and get to people who need them. And so, how do we rethink a lot of that intentional marketing and the intentional mailing that goes out, because it can give people access to different ideas and different connection points to other businesses. So I do think that we'll be able to leverage back to leverage the networks. How are we working together with other places where people gather to figure out how do we get information to them quicker? Because we've got issues with people who have disabilities. We have issues with people who don't have technology access. And so we've got to think creatively about being inclusive and making sure that we're targeting that communication to the audience that needs it most.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I'll add to that is we are lucky, here in the States that, while that's a stay-at-home order, there's social distancing, you can still get outside. So there's ways for brands to still go to neighborhoods and act with social distancing. My sister's in U City, and last night a brass band marched down her street and played music to try to lift the spirits of people. There's brands, Luxco's a local spirits brand. They've actually taken a country artist out on the streets on the back of a trailer to play music through neighborhoods. So, that's a chance where there may be neighborhoods that don't have internet access or great internet access, but that doesn't mean that you can't still get out there and try to deliver a message that's authentic to your brand.
And I think it's also the responsibility of employers to make it clear to their associates that they are there for them, even if they are presently on furlough or laid off. I heard this morning from several of our commissioners that run large hotels in this region that they are the anchor for their staffs, and that if they need to advocate for them, they will. I heard examples today of major employers in the hospitality industry in this community reaching out on behalf of their associates to Ameren to make sure that their power was not curtailed, as an example of inclusion and ensuring that that these lines of communication remain open, even if somebody doesn't have the ability to access the internet.
Brian, you bring up a really good point on the advocating for our team members, because I think today there was another 6 million unemployment claims filed. We're up to close to 17 million in this country. Before this, we had a labor shortage, and we had a real disconnect. And as we recover, and it will be a process, it will take time. I don't see us turning the spigot completely back on, but as that process continues, how we treat our team members today is going to greatly impact where they want to work and how they want to work going forward. And so the opportunity to solidify that retention and that trust goes a long way to being able to say, you're going to attract really great talent in the future, because we will get through this, we will have a future, and you're going to be able to retain the best and brightest to make sure that you're able to achieve great things together. So those decisions today, if you can do anything to make that interim less painful for people, will go a long way to building that relationship in the future.
We have one more question, and as we are wrapping up, this one's from Carl. He asked, what digital supports do you have and use? Do you have a client customer support landing page for relevant information in navigating this crisis?
We do. We've got a resource page at ccoleadership.com that includes lots of communication templates, how to have conversations with your people, how to have those conversations with your clients, decision matrices. Everything feels urgent right now. Everything's a priority. So how are you making decisions? How can you help your team prioritize and work efficiently together, even though you're working virtually? So would encourage you, and I would imagine a lot of people do, encourage you to download any of those resources. We're making them available and putting more out there every day.
Yeah, FleishmanHillard as well has a external facing dedicated home for COVID related information. But turning this question a little bit on its head as you think about whether each one of your organizations should have a digital home for information on how you're managing the COVID crisis, I would ask you to step back and think about what you need to communicate to your customers and your target audiences externally, and whether they're already going to your web home for one reason or another, and then thinking through how you're reinforcing your specific priorities during this crisis. And the answers to those questions will really dictate whether you need a standalone home or a page on your existing web home. But the most important thing is to make sure your target audiences know what matters to you and know and understand what's driving your decisions. And so for many of the clients we're working with, that does mean a COVID-specific digital home to communicate everything that matters to them, to their stakeholders.
And you can also, to that note, you can also visit the St. Louis Regional Chamber's website. We have a business resource page that has links to many of our partners that can direct you, because we are not the experts in a lot of things, and we will direct you to the experts, but we are here to support our members and our investors and our community partners. Well, I want to say thank you so much to our panelists. For those of you listening, if you have any future topics you would like us to discuss, please drop those in the chat comments now. The PowerPoint deck will be sent to all participants after the webinar. We hope you can join us on Tuesday at 10 a.m. for a policy briefing, and next Thursday at 10 a.m. for our next webinar on responding to supply chain concern. Again, thank you so much, Susan, Rebecca, Brian, and Josh. You are all amazing and wonderful. And to Bethany, Kelly, Mary, and Brittany at the Chamber for organizing and executing this webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day and get outside and enjoy the weather.